Howdy gamers, I'm the 112, this is the channel where I'm always right, and this is Peak Mechanical Storytelling. It's a game called Orwell that nearly 300 people played at launch, and maybe 200,000 people have played ever. Allow me to change that. The premise here is that Big Brother from George Orwell's 1984 hit a nasty fusion dance with modern-day NSA. There's a series of terrorist attacks occurring, you work for them, and it's your first day. Using an advanced data gathering system, you scour the internet collecting all available information on potential suspects, essentially taking the place of the FBI agent that lives in your phone since you're able to access their personal devices if you happen across the proper intel. Based on the intel you gather, you create databases that the authorities will use to determine their best course of action, meaning that the amount of information you find isn't your primary objective, but rather the information's relevance to the current case. You'll find yourself parsing through publicly available articles, finding statements from the people you're investigating, and then cross-referencing that public information with a personal phone call they had 2 minutes ago, which you listened in on in real time. During all of this, you're presented with conflicting information since humans are contradictory creatures, meaning you're not just passively experiencing a predetermined narrative, but rather shaping one as you decide which bit of conflicting info to pass on to the authorities. If this sounds even remotely interesting to you, the game has a free demo that you can play before deciding if it's worth a $10 price tag, but since this is YouTube and I need you to stay watching this video, here's an example of how your first day can go. The point of Orwell is to paint a picture. You're paired with Symes who will teach you the fundamentals. You're trained on how to use your tools, the reader and the listener, to investigate Cassandra Watergate, who we suspect is related to the bombing because she's been arrested in the past for assaulting a police officer. Doesn't help that after we dig further, we find out she's an activist with rich parents who may or may not have gotten the charges dropped, depending on who you ask. Really doesn't help that she's fucking her lawyer either. Makes for a pretty ugly picture, doesn't it? And mind you, this is all information that you can learn about her publicly from browsing the reader. Don't forget that we tapped her chat logs off a couple usernames we found connected to her socials, meaning we have direct access to her ongoing communications. From there, we find out that she's on antidepressants, is prone to sudden mood swings, and that she joined the activist group Thought via a man named Goldfells. Seems like joining this group is what brought her to the protest where she assaulted that officer, but why did she do it? Well, if you ask her, she didn't. Court said so too. There was conveniently no surveillance footage of her attacking said officer, and that's where the picture gets muddy. It's pretty awesome things worked out this way for her since she admits to cracking the officer's skull in a fit of rage on a text chat with her friend. She seems to feel pretty guilty about it, and her friend even says it was to defend her, but the picture's looking pretty clear, isn't it? I think we might be able to get that case reopened. Though, let's say this isn't the picture we want to paint. Say we believe she didn't mean to crack that officer's skull and lives in constant regret of her actions to the point of having panic attacks. Say the daily routine of walking through the plaza where she did it weighed too heavy on her conscience and she sought medication for it. Would you still have her arrested? Hate to break it to you, but it wouldn't have mattered. The moment she stepped on that bus was the moment her fate was sealed. The point of Orwell is to paint a picture. You're still painting inside the system's lines. These lines said our bomber needed to have blue hair and a nose ring, so you made it happen. You can imagine Symes' surprise when the second bomb goes off even though we've apprehended our suspect. Same time tomorrow? Hope you all enjoyed that. I think I went a bit heavy-handed with the painting metaphor, but I'm also talking about a game that tasks you with cyberstalking a blue-haired activist/artist whose last name is Watergate. Subtlety is not something we're operating with here. I mean, fuck's sake, the guy training you literally chose to make his Orwell name Symes. You know, like the character Syme from George Orwell's 1984 who writes the Newspeak dictionary. Point is, we were never trying to be subtle in the first place. I don't think dystopian media should be subtle. The crux of the genre is critiquing systems that feel oppressive by exaggerating them to extremes. Nothing about that lends itself to innuendo. Yet somehow we've gotten to the point where it's become a trend for dystopian worlds to be relegated to set dressing for whatever genre is meant to take the main stage. So it feels incredibly refreshing to play a game where the dystopia isn't just a background but rather an immersive experience. That said, tying the level of immersion almost directly to the type of corporate environment you thrive best in was an interesting choice. If you're the type of person who prefers to never be bothered while doing your job, then Symes' constant quipping might annoy you a bit, especially since for some reason you can't just keep playing the game while he talks. Every time he interjects with a quip, which is damn near every time you update somebody's profile, you have to dismiss his dialogue box before you can get back to reading text messages. But instead of armchair deving and trying to pitch a fix, I'm gonna try and justify it in a way that's as spoiler-free as possible. While Symes' incessant interjections are annoying, there comes a point in the story where he's unable to come in for work. The character taking over for him isn't nearly as talkative, which is pretty nice at first. But since you've been working with Symes all week, you've gotten used to his sense of humor. So when you see a nice bit of information with some low-hanging fruit, you make the connection in your head as you drop the info and wait for it to upload. And instead of Symes bringing the joke in your mind to life, nothing happens. It's a bit melancholy if I'm honest, but I've got to give them props for making me miss a guy cracking jokes about citizens' personal info. It's probably my favorite moment to highlight how well the devs nailed that feeling of living within a dystopia. Not even just living in it, but being an active participant. It's one thing to give someone a good enough grudge to be against the system, like Cyberpunk. It's another thing entirely to emulate how fucked up it would feel to work for that system. There were quite a few moments where I'd stumble upon a data chunk that hit me with the feeling of, I shouldn't know this. And that's not really something a lot of games do for me. I'll acknowledge that I might just be falling victim to the music doing its job, but if you can let yourself really sink into this game, it just works. And then they made a second one. It plays pretty much the same as the first game with the introduction of 2 new mechanics, one of them being a data limit. What I mean is that every piece of information you add to the database takes 10 minutes to upload and you have to clock out at 5. Now you've got to be a bit pickier with what information you deem worthy of an upload. Although this time around, the plot's a bit more ridiculous, I guess. Which brings me to the second mechanic. You're utilizing government tools to wage a social media war on a guy with a podcast because he's got suspicions that the government is monitoring their personal devices. This is a problem because we are. So it's our job to dig deep into his history to use anything we can find to discredit his statements, even going so far as to access his post drafts in order to build our narratives effectively. The best part here is, it feels a bit more immersive than the first game since they were able to afford voice actors for the phone calls and audio files you find. That said, while I do think the gameplay and immersion are both immensely improved upon, it almost feels like that came at the cost of the tone. The tonal juxtaposition of solving a terrorist attack with a guy wisecracking in our ear really sold that dystopian fantasy to me in a way that waging the Orwellian equivalent of a Twitter beef just can't quite live up to. I think that all just circles back to my criticism of the writing being a bit heavy-handed, which somehow bleeds into playing these games back to back. Because if you play the sequel after playing the first, you're given the option to import your save data. Doing this will have your newsfeed updated in correspondence with the events of the first game, because both are happening at the same time. This tone shift might be why the dystopian aspect of this world actually works, though. While the first game absolutely nails that bleak, hopeless, almost heavy feeling typically associated with the genre, it's still typical. Simply seeing that dystopian exaggeration used to highlight how ridiculously these systems operate under a more scrutinous lens would also be typical, which is why Osmotic Studios opted for the genius third option. Make it both. While it's entirely possible that I'm operating on necrophilic levels of death of the author here, I'm never going to pass up an opportunity to glaze something that can reasonably be construed as brilliant. By establishing the timeline for both of these games to be taking place not just parallel but perpendicularly, you're forcing anyone who thinks about that for a minute to realize something. It's fucking Snowden again. The point of Orwell is to paint a picture. You are painting that picture within the system's lines. These lines are here to protect the people. But did we ever think about which people they're protecting? I don't even know I'm trying to build suspense about this when the game is this heavy-handed. The systems in place are there to protect the people who put them in place. Yes, the first game sees you tracking down the orchestrator of a terrorist attack. How could you not be protecting the people? But do you ever actually find and arrest the culprit? Or are you just building a narrative to justify your overreach? Given the sequel's plotline, I'm more inclined to lean towards the latter, especially after I went to DC last year. My fiance and I wanted to see the museums before they started pulling exhibits, and one of those was the International Spy Museum. Very cool place. You should absolutely get a ticket if you're in DC. Hashtag not sponsored. But they have this interactive experience that you can choose to engage with while taking your self-guided tour. The gist is to give some insight on how intelligence agencies operate and tackle threats as quickly as they do. You make an identity, learn to break code, create a disguise, play minigames, etc. One of those minigames is straight up just Orwell. I've gotta say, it's a bit fucked up playing a game whose thesis was, wouldn't it be crazy to live under a system like this? And then going to a museum where they're saying, you already are. It felt eldritch in nature, yet there's nothing natural about it. And remember, because we're dealing with the government, everything in this museum is what they're okay with the public seeing. I hate talking about this because I sound like a conspiracy theorist, but you can't show me low-hanging fruit and expect me not to pick it. This was supposed to be a Mass Effect video, but I don't have the energy to write about Mass Effect because every day I'm waking up to another obituary, another overreach, another scandal, all filtered through algorithms designed to keep me watching. I'm fucking tired, man. I just want to talk about video games, but there's about 200,000 people with a good chance of seeing this video, and that's not nothing. If you've played Orwell, if you've read A Hunger Games, if you've seen Horton Hears a Who, then you know that nothing starts to happen until you start to get loud about it. Every text, every email, every phone call, status update, news article, podcast, all of it matters. If it doesn't matter now, it will matter later. A canvas can only remain blank for so long until somebody paints it. So who's holding the brush? Me, I'm holding it. Like and subscribe. I'll see you later.